It's good to be here. And wow, I'm a fisherman, and I saw the river down here, and I'm actually going to read a little bit from a fishing story in a minute. But you got a beautiful campus, and I'm so glad some of you have been reading my work. I thought I'd just start off with just a question I get often is, what made me a writer? And I wanted to talk about two things I think were really important. The first happened when I was about 15 years old. I was in the library at my school, and at that time, the librarian had a list of the 100 greatest novels, and they were all in order, and I always liked to read, and I saw one that was called Crime and Punishment. And it sounded pretty good, you know, crime and punishment. I didn't know quite what I was getting into. Some of you may have read that great novel, but it's not quite a thriller. It's about 500 pages. But I remember going ahead and reading it, and obviously I love Dostoevsky. He actually remains maybe my favorite novelist, the great Russian writer. But I can remember when I should have been paying attention in biology, but I wasn't. I was on the back row, and I just kind of really gotten into the book, and there's a scene early on in the book where a pawnbroker is killed. If you know the book, Raskolnikov. I'm not giving anything away. This happens about 50 pages in. But I can remember exactly where I was. I was sitting there, and for the first time, it was like, I'd always loved to read, but it was like for all those years, first 15 years or years I'd been reading, I had entered a book. But when I read this book and that scene, it was so vivid and so intense, I felt like the book had entered me. And I think that was, looking back on it, one of the great moments of my life. And I mean that seriously. It made me want to be a writer because in the sense of just the ability to do that, to be able to use, just think about this, splotches of ink, and yet get someone to feel that kind of intensity. And, as I get older and I continue to read and I continue to see other ways that we can interact, through technology, I still think there's something that reading does. And I was thinking about a lot the last few months, and I think I figured out what it is. That as readers, all I'm really giving you is splotches of ink on a page. Now, if you start to care about the characters, if you feel like you see the landscape, if you hate one character, in a sense almost fall in love with another one, we've done that together. To me, it's the ultimate interactive experience because you're creating the characters and you're visualizing the scenes as much as I am. And I think that's pretty amazing. And it struck me, Stephen King had a really interesting comment. He once said that when the audience sees the monster in the movie, the audience is always disappointed. And the reason for that is your imagination is going to make something much more frightening because you're going to bring part of yourself into it. And to me, that's the amazing thing that books do. Your feelings. That's why sometimes you might have a different view of a character than another student when you read a book. But that to me is the amazing thing, this kind of, I'd call it a communion of two minds. And in a sense, I think to be a good reader is to be creative. You have to have imagination too. And as I say, I think that's a wonderful thing. But the other thing that was the great gift for me, and I didn't realize it at the time, was when I was your age in high school, I was a runner, and I was pretty good. I went on and I got a track scholarship and ran in college, and did pretty well there. And I'd graduated from college, and this is 40 years ago, and my times were going down, and it looked like I was going to have a chance to make the Olympic trials. I wouldn't have won. I wouldn't have been good enough to be one of the top three that would have gone to the Olympics. There's no way. But I just wanted to make the trials. That was, in a way, probably the biggest goal of my life. And I was training in the winter. My times had come down. It looked like I was on schedule to qualify. And I was going up a hill on a cold day, and a hamstring gave out. And that ended my career. And it was heartbreaking. I mean, it's funny because even today, about once a month, I'll dream that I'm getting ready to run, and I know I'm not in shape, and my hamstring hurts, but I still want to run, and it haunts me. But the great thing, and I think this is something to keep in mind, because I know this is a school where you have a lot of really good athletes. What's going to be your second act? When you get 28, or let's say you really are successful, there's probably going to come a time when your career ends, and what do you do? And I felt so lucky because as I pulled the hamstring, it's like all that energy I had went straight into writing. And everything I'd learned about discipline, I went into writing, because I write, since I've been about 27, for about 35 years, I've been writing probably averaging 5 hours a day. Days when it's going well, I've gone up to 10. But I think that training and that discipline, that ability to, if you're in a sport, to train months and months, is going to be a great gift to you. But you got to find that second act. Well, I wanted to read a little bit from a couple of things today. I thought I'd start off with Above the Waterfall, your benefactor's book I'm using here, and I appreciate his letting me borrow it. But my last novel is called Above the Waterfall, and it's about a young woman who's a park ranger, at least in part. And she has had when she was a child, she witnessed a school shooting, and she's had to deal with that in her life. And the only way she's been able to deal with it is to get as close to nature as she can. I know, a number of the seniors are going to the Chattooga River, and that's a river I love. I fish that river a lot because I'm a trout fisherman, and that's a wonderful experience, wonderful river. But this actually takes place near the river, and it's in about September, and the flowers are growing, and the flowers are black-eyed Susans, and these are flowers that get very high. I'm sure they're right around here. But in September, at least in North Carolina, about late September, they get really big, but they also get very beautiful. They almost glow because they're very yellow. And this woman in the novel, Becky, loves to go look at them right at dark because she can watch them. And as it gets dark, it's almost like they're in a pond because there's trees circling the meadow. So this is a scene where she, the bats have just come out. But I wanted to get as poetic a language as I could in this scene. So this is the little scene. Though sunlight tinges the mountains, black leather-winged bodies swing low. First fireflies blink languidly. Beyond this meadow, cicadas rev and slow like sewing machines. All else ready for night except night itself. I watch last light lift off level land. Ground shadows seep and thicken. Circling trees form banks. The meadow itself becomes a pond filling. On its surface, dozens of black-eyed Susans. I sit on ground, cooling, soon dew damp. Near me, a moldboard plow long left. Honeysuckle vines twine green cords. White flowers attached like Christmas lights. I touch a handle, slick from wrist shifts and sweaty grips. Memory of my grandfather's hands, calluses round and smooth as worn coins. One morning I'd watched him cross the field, the still ore rippling soil. In its wake, a caught wave of Cillian shine. But this plow is wearied into sleep. How long lying here? Perhaps a decade since saplings and sawbriar rise amid broom sedge. Above all else, those bold yellow blossoms in full-petaled bloom, what has brought me here. A deer emerges from the woods, nose up, stilt step, then steadying paws, another hoof lifted. Dark rises around me. The black-eyed Susans float like water lilies. All else disappears, but they hold their yellow glow. Moon mirrors, sun ghost. When the night pond floods its banks, I walk the trail to the state park truck. And one more paragraph from her. If you're ever on Jeopardy, maybe this will help you out. Do you know the word murmuration? Does anybody know that word? No? Okay, well, that's good. You're going to get something from this today because murmuration, you've seen it. Everybody in the room has seen it. It's when starlings flock, and you notice they start to weave, and it's almost like they're rippling in the air. That's murmuration. And this is a scene where Becky sees that and describes it. A mown hayfield appears, its blonde stubble blackened by a flock of starlings. As I pass, the field seems to lift, peak to see what's under itself, and then resettle. A pickup passes from the other direction. The flock lifts again, and this time keeps rising. A narrowing swirl as if sucked through a pipe, and then an unfurl of rhythm sudden sprung, becoming one entity as it wrinkles, smooths out, drifts down like a snapped bedsheet, then swerves and shifts, gathers and twists, murmuration, ornithology's word poem for what I see. 200 starlings at most, but in Europe sometimes 10,000, enough to punctuate a sky. Well, I hear y'all got a real first-class bass fishing team, right? I've been hearing good things about that, and I like the bass fish, but I love trout fishing even better. But I wrote a story a few years ago, and I'm just going to read a little bit from it. But you might try to guess if you know something about fishing, because I suspect this fish is in this river out here. But I don't know if you know that or not. But in the story, these guys that are all retired are fishing one day, and they see this huge fish, almost 6 feet long. And what they do is nobody believes them. How could a fish that big, be here? And but they're right. It's there. And but once they start telling people and everybody believes them, they start trying to catch them. And if you know something about trout fishing, you'll notice they're using all sorts of lures, because one guy's actually hooked it with a rubber worm, and but he couldn't get it in. So anyway, this is a scene where they're trying to catch it, and all sorts of guys are trying to catch it. So, in the next few days, so many fishermen came to try their luck that Rudolph finally bought a wire-bound notebook from Cedric and put up signs for 15-minute slots, because they're bound around a big pool about the size of one of these, rows through here. Yeah. A good half of the anglers succumbed to the theory that what had worked before would work again, so rubber worms were the single most popular choice. The rubber worm devotees used a range of different sizes, hues, and even smells. Some went with 7-inch rubber worms, while others favored 10-inch. Some tried worms purple with white dots, while others tried white with purple dots, and still others tried pure white and pure black, and every variation, including a chartreuse pink, turquoise, and fuchsia. Some used rubber worms and auger tails, and others used flat tails. Some used worms that smelled like motor oil, and some worms smelled like strawberries, and some worms had no smell at all. The others were divided by their devotion to live bait or artificial lures. Almost all bait fishermen used night crawlers and red worms in the belief that if the fish had been fooled by an imitation, the actual live worms would work even better. But they also cast spring lizards, minnows, crickets, grubs, wasp larvae, crayfish, frogs, newts, toads, and even a live field mouse. The lower contingent favored spinners or panther martin and rooster tail variety, though they were not averse to rapellas, jitterbugs, hula poppers, Johnson silver minnows, devil horses, and a dozen other hook-laden pieces of wood or plastic. Some lures sank and bounced along the bottom. Some lures floated, and still others gurgled and rattled, and some made no sound at all. And one lure even changed colors depending on depth and water temperature. Jarvis Hampton cast a Rapella F-14 he'd once caught a tarpon on in Florida. A subgroup of fly fishermen cast muddler minnows, woolly worms, woolly boogers, royal coachman streamers, and wet flies, nymphs, and dry flies, and some hurled nymphs and dry flies together that swung overhead like miniature bolas. During the first 5 days, 5 brown trout, 1 speckled trout, 1 ball cap, 2 smallmouth bass, 10 knotty heads, a bluegill, and an old boot were caught. A gray squirrel was snagged by an errant cast into a tree. Neither the squirrel nor the various fish outweighed the boot, which weighed 1 pound and 8 ounces, and after the water was poured out, of course. On the third day, Wesley McIntyre's rod doubled and the drag whirred. A rainbow trout leaped in the pool's center. Wesley's 1/4 ounce Panther Martin spinner embedded in its upper jaw. He fought the trout for 5 minutes before his brother Robbie could net it. The rainbow was 22 inches long and weighed 5.5 pounds, big enough that Wesley took it straight to the taxidermist to be mounted. But that's not the fish. Anybody want to guess what kind of fish it is? Close. Sturgeon, very good. Sturgeon. Very good. Yeah. In the Tennessee Valley system, including in North Carolina, sturgeon they can get up to about 8 feet long. And they're out there, but sometimes people don't realize it. But yeah, these guys end up catching the sturgeon, yeah. And what they use to catch it with is a big water snake. They hook a water snake and throw it out into the pool and catch it. Yeah. All right. I'm going to finish with 2 more poems. I think we got time for 2 more. The first one is a childhood memory. I don't know if any of you were sleepwalkers when you were kids, but I was. And it's a very scary experience because I tended to not just wake up in the house. I'd walk outside sometimes, and I'd wake up and suddenly I wouldn't know where I was. But I decided to write a poem about that feeling. And this is called Sleepwalking. Strange how I never once woke in a hallway on a porch step, but always outside, bare feet slick with dewgrass, the house deeper shadow, while above the moon leaned its round shoulder on a white oak's limbs. Stars spread skyward like fistfuls of jacks. Rising as if from water was the way dark lightened, slow returning, reluctant, as though while I'd been sleeping, summoned away to attend matters other than a child's need for the world to be in. And a final poem, thank you for your attention today. One of my uncles was a farmer in North Carolina near Boone, and he had cattle as well. And I remember one night, one of his cows was very ill, and he had to call a veterinarian. And there was a vet at that time who was in his early 80s, and he would come out no matter what time of night it was, knowing very often he wouldn't get paid, and very often maybe the worst thing of all, knowing that the animal would maybe not even be alive when he got there, because farmers would tend, particularly if they waited that late, it might be too late. But I remembered that man. I really admired him, and I've actually got 2 friends who are large animal vets. I don't know, are any of you think about going into vet school? Anybody here? Somebody, surely. I'm sure there are a couple of you. You don't have to raise your hand, but good. I've always found vets to be incredibly special people. They've got a kind of compassion that I don't often see in doctors. I think most doctors have that, but I've never seen a vet who didn't. It's really kind of interesting, but particularly large animal vets. And I just tried to imagine what would it, one day, sometimes this is how a poem or a story starts. I'll just kind of say, well, what would it be like to be that man? To have to go out and drive a real backcountry for miles, knowing the animal might not be alive. And but this is a night when something good happens. So we'll end on a happy note. It's called 3 a.m. and the stars were out. When the phone rings way too late for good news, just another farmer wanting me to lose half a night's sleep and drive some backcountry wash out for miles, fix what he's botched. On such nights, I'm like an old drowsy God, tired of answering prayers. So let it ring a while, hope they might hang up. Well, of course they don't. Don't because they know the younger vets shuck off these dark expeditions to me, thinking it's my job, not theirs. Because I've done it so long, I'm used to such nights. Because old as I am, I'll still do what they refuse to. And soon I'm driving out of Marshall, headed north, most often toward Shelton Laurel, toward some barn where a calf that's been bad bred to save stud fees is trying to be born, or a cow laid out in a barn stall, dying of milk fever, easily cured if a man hadn't wagered against his own dismal luck, waited too late, hoping to save my fee for a salt lick, roll of barbed wire. And it's not all his fault. Poor too long turns the smartest man stupid, makes him see nothing beyond a short-term gain, which is why I know more likely than not I'll be arriving too late. What's to be done, best done with rifle or shotgun. So make driving the good part. Turn off my radio. Let the dark close around until I know a kind of loneliness that doesn't feel sad as I pass the homes of folks I don't know. May never know, but wonder what they're dreaming, what life they wake to, thinking such things. Or sometimes just watching for what stays unseen except on country roads after midnight. The copperhead soaking up what heat the blacktop still holds. Foxes and bobcats, one time in the 50s, a panther, yellow eyes bright as truck beams, black tipped tail swishing before leaping away through the trees, back into its extinction. All this thinking and watching, keeping my mind off what waits on up the road. Worst of all, the calves I have to pull one piece at a time, birthing death. Though sometimes it all works out. I turn a calf's head, and then like a safe's combination, the womb unlocks, calf slides free. Or this night, when stubborn life got back on its feet, round eyes clear and hungry, my IV stuck in its neck. And I take my time packing up, ask for a second cup of coffee, so I can linger a while in the barn mouth watching stars awake in their wide pasture. Thank y'all.